Whether you're a salesperson or a technician, a manager or a specialist, I have no doubt that you have all experienced the situation I'm about to describe. Imagine walking into a meeting room, one of those huge ones with a very long table and a projector for presentations, or entering a new construction site that has just been set up. Someone comes up to you and holds out his hand. He says, "Bill Johnson, Design Office." Then some other people arrive and you shake 4 or 5 different hands. In the meantime, you try to rearrange your thoughts about what to do, or you look around to see if your colleague has arrived. Then we finally begin. Taking the floor is the first person who introduced himself. Now I ask you, do you remember his name? Maybe not. Some of you may be thinking that you are just not good with names. Others may feel misled, and that in real life this would not happen. Either of those things may be true, but it's worth going a little deeper and understanding that hearing what we are told and really listening are 2 different things. A difference that involves the mechanisms of our brains, our culture, the way we have been educated, and much more. This is Getting to Know Us, a 4-part journey that looks past the surface and explores the values that guide us every day in our professional lives. Getting to Know Us is a podcast series by Cora Media, sponsored by Tessia Group. Superficially, listening should be one of the easiest activities in the world. Just let the sound of the other person's voice enter our ears, and that's it. But hearing is not the same as getting the message, understanding what the other person is communicating to us. Listening in the true sense of the word is a very taxing operation for our brains. It requires considerable effort. And in fact, one of the most common obstacles to communication, in business as in everyday life, is precisely this. Instead of listening, we prefer to talk because it comes easier to us. Nicola De Pisapia, associate professor in the Department of Psychology and Cognitive Science at the University of Trento in Italy, confirms this. Although speaking is one of the most complex activities for our brains, listening is even more difficult. The reason is that when we speak, our brain already knows what it wants to say, knows the content of the message, whereas when we listen, we are called upon to make assumptions, to put ourselves in the other person's shoes, to change our point of view. And this uncertainty requires an effort. Listening, then, is not as easy as it may seem. It takes practice. Somewhat like the students of the Pythagorean school in the 6th century before Christ did. They had to remain silent for a very long period of time. Some historians say 2 years, others say up to 5 years, to refine their ability to listen to what was being said by the wiser members. For this, they were called akasmatikoi, which means those who listen in Greek. Nowadays, we are pretty far from the principles of the Pythagorean school. Think about it. Among the first things we are taught as children is not listening, but speaking. But if we are so good at speaking, if it comes so easily to us, why is communicating so difficult? How many times do colleagues say to each other, "Oh, we should communicate more"? If we had shared this information, we would not have made that mistake. And so on. And how many times, after talking about it together, perhaps during a very long updating call with other teams, has the situation been resolved? Probably only a few. Here's something that may surprise you. Sometimes talking doesn't help. Or rather, sometimes it's not enough. Kind of like when you want to bake a cake, but you don't have a key ingredient like flour or eggs. Now, surely some of you know a foolproof recipe for making a delicious cake without flour or eggs, but you can't get away with that in communication. Talking is not enough. You also need to listen. A type of listening that is called active, that is, participatory. Attentive listening, geared toward really understanding the other person and the message. So, not only the words, but also what is not explicitly said. And how do we listen actively? By activating something we all have within us, because it is part of our DNA, and which we can also train. It's empathy. A very important ability in human beings and actually in all mammals. We can define empathy as the ability to feel the same emotions as someone else. Thus, if we are facing someone who is afraid, empathy allows us to feel their fear. The same is also true for positive emotions. You may have seen people around you laughing and burst out laughing in turn, without really knowing why. Our emotions, however, do not transfer to others automatically. How does empathy work then? It's a process that needs input, signals to be interpreted. Nicola De Pisapia gives the example of body movement, or the facial expressions that we all make without realizing it when we feel a certain emotion. These signals are received and decoded by those who observe us, and this triggers in them an empathic reaction towards us. A reaction that, in a way, also happens in the brain. Some studies have even shown that when we empathize with someone, the same regions that are activated in their brains are also activated in ours. We're talking about emotions, brain connections. Yet, I want to play devil's advocate a little bit and raise a question. If empathy can be a very useful skill in life, does it also yield concrete benefits at work? It's a fair question, and I'll try to give you two different answers. The first has to do with our general well-being. We work about 40 hours a week, so we share more or less 1/3 of our days with office mates, workshop mates, colleagues visiting from other offices. A sharing context that is made up not only of strictly work-related activities, but also of small talk at the coffee machine, personal anecdotes. Empathy allows us to look past the surface, see others aside from the roles they play, and perhaps spark new connections. The second answer is more strictly work-related. Imagine that you are in the middle of a negotiation with a client. You are suggesting a solution that you think is perfect for his or her needs, and you are so convinced of it that you don't even entertain the doubt that to him or her, that solution doesn't seem adequate. And then, when the agreement is not signed, you cannot explain what happened. Here, empathy could have helped you understand certain signals. For example, when the client said, "Well, I need to talk to the technicians first." Perhaps he or she meant, "I don't think it's the right solution for me, but I don't want to say it out loud so as not to be rude." Empathy, in short, can help us decipher the message, as long as we use it properly. If, for instance, we are faced with a very angry, frustrated person, and we are overly empathetic, we would risk being unduly influenced by their emotions, and this would become counterproductive for both of us. How can we find a balance? Nicola De Pisapia suggests that we must combine empathy with a less emotional and more cognitive skill, which is called perspective taking, that is, looking at things from the other person's point of view. A classic example is that of the chess player who, before making a move, tries to understand how his or her opponent will react and what his or her response will be. Other than empathy, then, we have added another ace up our active listening sleeve: putting ourselves in other people's shoes, leaving their and our own emotions aside for a moment. Admittedly, it sounds like a very difficult thing to do, but in fact, We can use techniques that help us be a team player. One of the simplest and most effective things to do is paraphrasing. That is, recapping in our own words what the other person has said to make sure that we have actually understood what they mean. Imagine that you have been assigned a project, such as a feasibility study, to carry out with a large and varied group of colleagues. In an ideal world, everyone gets along with everyone, moves at the same speed. Individual responsibilities are clear, but not in the real world. With some colleagues, you get on immediately, while with others, it's more of a struggle. Putting ourselves in other people's shoes, actually in cognitive shoes, as Nicola De Pisapia would say, can help us understand why they do not share our analysis or find flaws in our proposal. We can accomplish this quite effectively by paraphrasing, that is, by rephrasing what is being communicated to us. A simple, "So you're saying that," or "If I understand you correctly, you are claiming that," is enough. Paraphrasing has 3 strong points. First, it shows the other person our openness to them. Second, it allows us to check whether we have actually understood what they are saying. And finally, it encourages the other person to do the same. That is the heart of the matter. How can you build a team if you don't understand each other? Let's try to add another often underestimated tool that can improve communication, especially when there is a hierarchical relationship such as that between a manager and his or her team members. I'm referring to silence. Don't be surprised. We started this journey by pointing out that sometimes talking is not essential. Obviously, I am not referring to those obstinate, hostile silences that raise barriers between people. What I mean is an active, encouraging silence that leaves room for other people to express themselves, and why not, even complain if need be. No one likes to hear criticism, especially if it comes from one of our own, from a player on our team. But let's try to think about how many times the simple act of expressing our discomfort has made us feel better. Maybe we feel a little overwhelmed by a series of tight deadlines. You only need to run into the boss in the hallway and, in reply to "How's it going?" you could seize the opportunity to vent a little. When you get back to your workstation, the problem hasn't been solved. The deadlines are still there, but having been heard makes you feel lighter. This happens because venting allows that emotion to express itself, to run its course until it peaks and then diminishes, fading away. This is a very useful process in, shall we say, straightforward situations. But Nicola De Pisapia reminds us that venting shouldn't be the only way to manage negative emotions, especially expressions of chronic malaise. In this case, venting may even be counterproductive, and one should instead work on the cause of that negative emotion. If a frustration is recurrent, one must act on a more cognitive level, making different decisions or changing perspective to solve the root problem. Speaking of perspectives that need to be changed, there is one aspect of corporate life that requires great effort in this regard. I'll illustrate it with a sports metaphor, using the words of Julio Velasco, the Argentinian coach who has recently become the new coach of the Italian women's national volleyball team, and who led the men's national team to unprecedented successes in the early 1990s. When asked what the secret to building a team is, he says, "It is essential to be clear about the difference between group and team, because very often we tend to confuse these two terms. A group is a sum of people doing things together, like a school class. The key difference is that a team needs clear goals, a conscious way of playing, and set roles." So, when there is a lack of information sharing in the company, When no one says which direction they are going in, we are not teaming up as well as we could. Instead, giving the team insight and making them aware of strategic decisions allows everyone to work more consciously, to collaborate better. And when we do that, something very special happens in our brain. De Pisapia points out that in recent years, neuroscientific research has shown that when we cooperate effectively, many parts of our brain synchronize. This can be measured with electroencephalography, a technique that records electrical brain activity. When two or more people talk to each other and understand each other, their brain activity, represented as waves, shows the same pattern. We have talked about effective communication in the work environment, but let's not forget that its power does not end when we go home. It is also a fundamental skill in our personal lives because it helps us to relate to others, share our plans, and express our thoughts. In short, to choose how to deliver a message that is not only useful, but at the same time, conveys something about us. Getting to Know Us is a podcast series by Cora Media, sponsored by Tessia Group. Written by Alessandra Menozzi. Translated and narrated by Rosita Martini. Recording engineer Luca Possi. Post-production and sound design by Cristiano Lomele. Production by Monia Donati. Text editing by Graziano Nani.